Hello, everyone. My name is Shakiba Shayani. I'm the President and CEO of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce, and I will be the moderator this afternoon. As a leading voice of business, the Guelph Chamber is pleased to be hosting this Q&A session. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Guelph is on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples. During our region's rich Indigenous history, these lands have been home to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Métis. We express gratitude for the sharing of these lands. We also acknowledge the tragic history between Indigenous peoples and settlers. The Guelph Chamber strives to be accountable by acknowledging this history and cultivating respectful, reciprocal relationships with Indigenous peoples and the land. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this event, the Guelph and District Association of Realtors and Michael Keegan and Associates. Thank you for helping bring this important session to fruition today. Here at the Guelph Chamber of Commerce, we continue to play an important role in bringing together business and community leaders to advocate to all levels of government for policies and leadership that enhance the social and economic prosperity of our city, including through sessions like this one. Businesses in Guelph and across the province have experienced an unprecedented 2 years, characterized by a multi-wave pandemic, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, geopolitical turmoil, and inflation that has reached a 30-year high. As businesses and community members continue to feel the effects of the pandemic, the next 4 years will be critical to determining the future of Ontario's business community and overall economic success. We're looking forward to today's discussion. I'm pleased to be joined by Rochelle Devereaux, Ontario Liberal Party, James Parr, Ontario New Democratic Party, and Mike Schreiner from the Green Party of Ontario. Unfortunately, Peter McSherry of the Ontario PC Party let us know he is no longer able to attend. Now I'll review the format that will be used this afternoon, and the format has been shared with the candidates in advance. The order in which candidates will speak will be done in alphabetical order from the candidates' last names. First, each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for opening remarks. Then we will move into the Q&A session. The questions have come from members of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce and members of the community. The topics we will cover today include affordability, housing, economic recovery, transportation, healthcare, education, and the workforce. Candidates, you will be given 1 minute to answer the question, and you will be able to monitor your time on the screen. Please note that in the interest of time, each candidate may be cut off after the time allotted has passed. The order of questions are answered will be identified by me, the moderator, on a rotating basis. Candidates, you will have an opportunity for a rebuttal if you or your party have been directly named by another candidate. In addition, rebuttals have the following rules. Rebuttals will not be allowed based on comments made during opening and closing remarks. A request for a rebuttal will be signaled to the moderator, me, by using the raise hand function in Zoom. There are no rebuttals to rebuttals, and my decision as moderator will be final. I will be limiting rebuttals to 1 minute in length. Lastly, each candidate will be given the opportunity for a closing statement. The candidate order will be the reverse from the introductions at the start, and closing statements are limited to 90 seconds in length. So that we can get through as many questions as possible, I ask that the candidates be respectful of the time and as always of each other. Candidates, please be sure to mute yourself when you are not speaking. Okay, I'd like to introduce the candidates in alphabetical order by last name. Rochelle Devereaux from the Ontario Liberal Party, James Parr from the Ontario New Democratic Party, and Mike Schreiner from the Green Party of Ontario. And now we will begin with opening remarks. Rochelle, to you.
Thank you, Shakiba. My name, as Shakiba shared, is Rochelle Devereaux. And I first fell in love with Guelph when I came here for university in 1996. For the past 5 years, I have been the CEO of the Guelph Community Health Center, where I lead a team of over 160 healthcare professionals who provide comprehensive wraparound primary healthcare to those who have barriers in our great city. I have also led this team through the current pandemic, the world's most complex health crisis in modern memory. In these roles, I have helped to solve many complex challenges with our community and with the province, ensuring that those who directly experience the problems themselves are always around the table. I lead change with my community. I am also before you today as Ontario Liberal candidate for the City of Guelph. And I am part of a team that stands for economic dignity, part of a team with policies that are bold, such as basic income and regionally set living wages. Our Ontario Liberal team includes nurses, doctors, and healthcare leaders like myself, who are ready and able to guide the rebuilding of our healthcare system and to transform senior care. I also am part of a team that is made up of environmental climate activists and scientists who will help us to restore the countless environmental protections that we have lost over the last 4 years. I am part of a team who has the vision and capability to take bold action as part of our housing affordability. We have a team and a plan to make Ontario a place to grow again. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. To you, James.
Thank you very much. For those who don't know me, my name is James Parr, and I'm representing the NDP. I'm a lifelong Guelphite, and I absolutely love this city. I'm a renter, I'm an employee, I have a huge amount of OSAP debt, and it wasn't too long ago I was living in my parents' basement. What you need to know is I absolutely love Guelph and I'm committed to serving this great city. I'm a proud son of 2 small business owners and entrepreneurs, and from a young age, I've seen the struggles and the joy that comes from owning a small business. And as a candidate, I've had the privilege of talking to small business owners all across this city. And one common thread that they all brought up is the struggles of rising costs of goods and services, a labor shortage, and the rising cost of housing for themselves and their employees. The NDP has a plan to tackle that, and I believe that we'll do it by attacking the root issue: affordability, housing, and making sure small businesses can compete more competitively for good labor. From talking to my peers, it is clear when they're looking for a new job, a good paycheck, benefits were their top priority area, followed by location and available housing. To make small businesses more competitive, we're offering dental care, pharma care, and mental health care all rolled up into OHIP, so they don't have to pay the benefits the government will. We also have a plan to fix housing, so employees and the owners can live and work in Guelph and continue to spend their money and reinvest it into the local economy. We want to work with municipalities and offer 50% to cover 50% of their base costs so that they can grow their transit networks or cut their property taxes. If the recent news is to be believed, we could be on the cusp of further economic difficulties. That's why the Ontario NDP is offering more grants for small businesses. I'm very excited to talk to you more about my platform during this debate.
Thank you, James. Mike.
Thank you, Shakiba, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting today's debate, and just to everyone who's tuning in. I just want to say that it's been such an honor to be your MPP and to serve this community that I love over the last 4 years. And I especially want to give a shout out just to the collaborative work my office has done with the Chamber and with the business community in Guelph, particularly navigating through the pandemic. As a longtime small business owner, I know how tough it's been on small businesses in particular, and just want to say I will continue to walk with you hand in hand to secure the supports you need to have a thriving recovery. I'm also just proud of the work we've done as a community together, securing funding for the largest renovation for Guelph Hospital that we've done in 20 years, securing funding for the Youth Wellness Hub so we can address the mental health challenges in our community, securing additional nonprofit and municipally owned long-term care beds for Guelph, because we know that we need to bolster senior care in this community and in this province. But I also know there's a lot more work to do. That's why I'm so proud of the Ontario Greens housing affordability strategy that Canada's largest newspaper has called a masterclass plan in delivering the solutions we need for this province. It's why I'm so proud of the climate action plan we've put together that addresses the affordability concerns people have and sets our community up and our province up to be a global leader in the fast emerging markets of the new climate economy. And finally, we are have a plan to invest in increasing healthcare capacity in this province, especially addressing the mental health crisis that so many people have been facing coming out of the pandemic by making mental health services available under OHIP and ensuring we reduce youth wait times to access mental health services.
Thank you, Mike. We're now going to begin into our questions. And right off the top, I'm going to ask all of you, and knowing that you've all been outdoor knocking over the last several weeks, I'm curious, what are you hearing generally from community members at the door? Rochelle, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Absolutely top of mind for Guelph residents has been affordability, and the affordability particularly of housing in this community. We know that bold action is needed. As you mentioned, Shakiba, we are facing incredible inflation increases that are stifling individuals, families, and businesses. And my response to Guelph voters when they talk about this is that I'm experiencing this too, and that the Ontario Liberal Party is committed to taking many steps in order to help us manage affordability. With a buck a ride transit rides across the province of Ontario and municipally, as well as increases to minimum wages to be regionally set living wages, as well as HST cuts to ensure that prepared foods are more affordable, we are taking direct action to put more dollars in Guelph residents' pockets so that together we can have economic inclusion in our community.
Thank you. James, how about you? What are you hearing at the doors?
I want to echo what Rochelle's been saying. Affordability and the climate change is the two major topics I see when I'm talking at the door. That's why the NDP has put forward a platform that wants to bring in rent control. So you pay exactly what the last tenant pays. We want to kick out large corporations and greedy landlords from the housing market to ensure housing is a basic human right, not an investment. We wanted to launch the Green New Democratic Deal to tackle climate change because the UN report that was just released today shows we don't have any time left. We have to act now. And on top of that, the affordability of everything has gone up. The inflation rate, I think, was at 6.8%. So we need a government that puts people first and not corporations. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, Shakiba, affordability, I think we're all hearing the same thing. And in particular, people have spoken to me about housing, food, and fuel. That's why I'm proud of Ontario Green's housing strategy to clamp down on speculation in the housing market to give first-time homebuyers a level playing field, removing the zoning rules that prevent builders and homeowners of having more choice in the housing market so we can ramp up supply while protecting our farmland and our wetlands. When it comes to fuel, we need to expand transit services and make them affordable, but we also need to make sure the average person can afford an electric vehicle because it costs about $2,000 a year less to drive electric. And finally, when it comes to food, you know, we have to protect the farmland that feeds us, but we're also proposing a grocery code of conduct to cut down on the price gouging and collusion that you do see in our concentrated retail markets in the food sector to both protect local farmers and consumers.
Thank you. So as one more attempt to get to know you a little bit better, can you let us know what your favorite local business or one of your favorite local businesses in Guelph is? James?
My favorite local business, well, I've got a couple. One of them I've really loved is Plant. I bought a lot of plants from them. I've killed a lot of plants from them. Eric the Baker has been responsible for a lot of pounds I've gained over the pandemic. And if it wasn't that, I absolutely love some cheese from Tome. Again, he's responsible for a lot of inches I've gained on my waistband. But it really goes to the mom and pop shops. I'll be going out to the boathouse very quickly to stand in a long line to either get a ice cream cone or paddle along the river. You name it, Guelph has some of the best local businesses. And I'm just so proud to be able to shop here. So I guess my last call out will be the bookshelf because they kept me sane throughout the majority of the pandemic.
Thanks, James. How about you, Mike?
You know what, Shakiba, this is a dangerous question to ask all of us because I don't know if any one of the three of us can list off all the wonderful local businesses we like to support. I do like to walk across the street from my constituency office to the Woolley for food and beverage responsibly. I love grabbing a coffee at either Capistrano or Planet Bean or the Red Brick or so many other fantastic cafes. I live on Arthur Street, so I love to go up Baramosa to Curtida and have wonderful Indian takeout food. The suit jacket comes from Sidonio, so I want to give a shout out to the fellers there for helping keeping me look good during these debates. And the shoes I have on come from IF, so I want to give them a shout out as well. There's so many great businesses, the bookshelf where I buy my books. There's just so many great businesses in Guelph, and I hope everyone goes out and supports all of them.
Thanks, Mike. How about you, Rochelle?
Thank you. I love the suggestions and ideas that you've all shared, Mike and James. During the pandemic, the Guelph Community Health Center's leadership team began to be known by name by Lucky Belly. When we called for our special order of our Lucky Box, we would be told by the owners, "Is this Rochelle? Is this Lindsay?" And yes, it was. Here we were, again, ordering a delicious lunchbox. I also really want to acknowledge IF shoes. And despite me trying to buy a really great pair of red shoes with a heel, my dog Rosie had other ideas for that heel. So I'll be seeing them again soon. Thank you, Rosie. And then finally, there is just a really unique business that I've had the opportunity to meet with our our office downtown, and that's Market Company, next door to my candidate office across from City Hall. Clothing, drinks, and great music.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thank you all for answering that question. Okay, let's get into some of the key topics that we've been talking about all election cycle here. We're going to start with healthcare. We believe that the people's well-being and the economy are intrinsically linked. We can't have a strong business community without a resilient healthcare system. How would you address the gaps in healthcare in Ontario? Mike, we start with you.
Well, first of all, it's investing in the people that deliver that healthcare. We know that so many nurses are feeling underappreciated, overworked, and disrespected right now. And so removing the legislation that places wage constraints on frontline healthcare workers, I think is vital to being able to hire the 33,000 nurses the Ontario Greens have committed to make sure we have adequate frontline staff in our hospitals, our primary care sector, in our home care sector. We're proposing a major expansion in funding for home care, especially so elders can age in place, making mental health services available through OHIP, and finally addressing poverty. Poverty puts most of the stress on our healthcare system, and doubling social assistance rates as the first step towards bringing in a basic income will help alleviate pressure on our healthcare system and improve the lives of our neighbors.
Thank you. Rochelle, how will you address the gaps in healthcare in Ontario?
As a community healthcare leader, I know the importance of equitable wages and staff who feel appreciated, seen, heard, valued, and supported through accessible healthcare counseling and mental health supports, as well as safe workplaces. And all of those components are part of our Ontario Liberal plan. We also know we need to right-size our hospital infrastructure that has not kept pace with a growth in population and complexity of health issues. I was incredibly excited to see Guelph General Hospital's redevelopment expressly named in our Ontario Liberal plan. And then finally, as Mike mentioned, investing in comprehensive primary healthcare in communities helps to take the pressure off hospitals and care for folks in the community where those needs can be met. And that's why I was also incredibly excited to see 15 new community healthcare CHCs, as well as investing in 100,000 healthcare workers to manage our surge.
Thank you. How about you, James?
We want to invest and not cut. We want to make sure that the nurses and the frontline services personnel know that they've been recognized. We want to remove the wage cuts placed upon them. We want to hire 30,000 additional nurses, 10,000 additional PSW workers, and make it easier for internationally trained nurses, doctors, and other medical professionals to work in Ontario. We also want to deprivatize long-term care and home care and reinvest to allow Ontarians to live in place or to make sure that they have a bed waiting for them when they choose to move in. We also want to ensure that every Ontarian, regardless of where they live, where they work, or their age, has access to dental care, pharmacare, and mental health care. As someone who's had their own mental health struggles, I understand how critical it is to ensure that everyone has prompt service to mental health care when they need it, because it could be the difference between life or death. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. And we're going to talk a little bit more about mental health. I want to ask all of you about your plans to address the mental health crisis that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Rochelle, we'll start with you.
Thank you. For those who've worked with me in our community, you will know that mental health and addictions is a really important issue to me and one that I have focused much of my career on. Guelph has incredible innovative leadership, particularly around community resilience and the prevention of early childhood trauma. And I was really pleased to be one of the founding members of our Community Resilience Coalition. We will be bringing that voice to Queen's Park to ensure that Guelph has the attention it deserves and the funding investments to spread this innovative upstream approach to supporting positive mental health in our communities. The Ontario Liberal Plan also includes investing in mental health workers within schools so that children who have struggled through the pandemic can have accessible, right time, right place mental health workers, as well as making monumental investments in our mental health system, including 3,000 mental health and addiction workers into our communities.
Thank you. James, how about you? How will your party address the mental health crisis?
Mental health is one of the reasons why I chose to run. And we pledge to make mental health care roll up into OHIP. So when you go see your social worker or your psychiatrist, you pay with your OHIP card, not your credit card. Mental health care is healthcare and needs to be seen as such. We want to make sure that when our children go to school, they have mental health supports integrated in the school system so they can get the help when they need it. We want to ensure that we declare the opioid crisis a public health emergency day one, and we want to decriminalize and provide a safe supply for because we believe that everyone should have access to healthcare regardless of their circumstances. We also want to make sure that families in their home have an affordable place to stay because there are the social determinants of health. So we want to make sure everyone has a living wage and can afford to eat, live, and thrive in the city that they choose.
Thank you. Mike, how will your party address the mental health crisis?
Well, first, everything is not okay when it comes to people's mental health, especially coming out of the pandemic. Though we were having significant backlogs in accessing mental health services pre-pandemic. And I just want to thank so many of the healthcare leaders here in Guelph, including Rochelle, who have provided a vital role in advising me on the steps we need to take to address mental health issues. I'm proud to say the Ontario Greens were the first party in Ontario history to put forward a standalone mental health plan. First, to make mental health services available through OHIP so people can access the care they need when they need it. Secondly, is addressing the just unacceptable wait times for young people. 28,000 young people are waiting up to 18 months, sometimes as long as 2 years. A firm commitment to reduce those wait times to 30 days to access the services they need. And finally, ensuring that we have permanent supportive housing in place with wraparound mental health, addictions, and other supports for people so they have a place to call home. So many healthcare providers have been saying, let's write prescriptions for housing for folks.
Thanks, Mike. I'm wondering if now you can speak to your party's plan to improve the standard of care for long-term care residents and patients. James, we start with you.
First of all, we want to remove all privatization from the industry because we believe every dollar spent should be spent on Ontarians and not lining the pockets of large corporations. We want to provide provincial guidelines for long-term care and home care to ensure that regardless of where you're in our province, you're getting the same care and it's adequate care. We want to make sure that everyone has minimal hours of contact with their PSW worker, and we want to make sure the PSW workers are also well paid. So we want to ensure at least a $5 an hour pay bump and hiring of 10,000 additional PSW workers to make sure we have the resources we need to make sure we can care for all Ontarians.
Thank you. Mike, what will the party do to improve the standard of care for long-term care residents and patients?
Yeah, so I'm been a strong advocate for a minimum standard of care of 4 hours for each and every resident in all long-term care homes across the province. It's something I fought for hard at Queen's Park and was first excited when the government finally agreed to do that, and then disappointed when the current government said they were going to wait till 2025 to deliver on that. We, the Ontario Greens, are put forward a funded platform that shows how we can deliver those 4 hours of care now. We would prioritize a 20% increase in the funding for home care, because we know most elders want to age at home, and we need to make sure the proper supports and care is in place, and that the people delivering that care are paid adequate wages. For people who need to access a long-term care home, making it a home and prioritizing care over profits, putting people first.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you. When the Ontario Liberal Party released our senior care plan, it was a similar commitment that I've just heard from our friends, which includes a commitment to ending for-profit long-term care models by 2028. That transformation also comes with a home care first guarantee for all seniors living in the province of Ontario, with an addition of 400,000 seniors having access to wraparound home care in their homes based on their needs, a needs-based system that's scalable as our needs change as we age. And we will also commit to a $25 minimum for PSWs working in the system, with compression adjusted rates for all healthcare workers who play such a vital role, both in our existing long-term care infrastructure, our new transformed state, as well as those delivering vital home care services to the people we love.
Thank you. So our final question under this category is, will your party commit to making virtual care permanent and enabling digital health innovation? Mike, we start with you.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was an important innovation. Obviously, you don't want virtual care to completely replace in-person care. So we want to ensure that in-person care is available as well. But I think the innovations that have happened in virtual care can certainly expand healthcare services. So absolutely. As a matter of fact, we need to bolster and reform primary care, period. Expanding family health teams to communities across the province, expanding the number of nurse practitioner-led clinics with a multidisciplinary and integrated approach to care, expanding community health centers and Indigenous health centers for that kind of community-based care is vital as we bolster primary care to take some of the pressures off of hospital and acute care.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Hi. Yeah, Guelph is an incredible leader in the implementation of Ontario Health Teams, which has a core foundational commitment to enabling digital care. What digital care does is both increases accessibility of healthcare, meaning that you can have a doctor's appointment while shopping and have a virtual or a phone call conversation, but it also increases access to specialist care, consultations, and it has a right time and a right place. There are still many diagnostics and assessments that require in-person care. And what the pandemic did was pushed us into that space where comfort, usability became second nature to so many of us. We need to ensure that we also have digital equity to accompany digital care, which means that folks all have access to devices and broadband services to make that care fully accessible.
Thank you, Rochelle. How about you, James?
100%. I've used our digital services through my healthcare provider, and it was very easy to step away from my work. And I believe that as Ontarians, we are already overworked, so there's no need to take any additional time off. Do it from the comfort of your home. On top of that, we want to offer pharma care and mental health care. So not only can you get services like mental health care at home if you need it, where it's comfortable, but if anything needs to be prescribed, you can do it over the phone and then go pick it up. Ontarians have worked hard, and taking a full day off work to go see a doctor sometimes isn't possible. So we want to make sure, regardless of any Ontarian circumstances, they can get the healthcare that they need, and it's covered by the government, not their checkbook.
Thanks, James. We're now going to move on and speak a little bit about infrastructure. Cities across Ontario are struggling to meet local infrastructure needs amidst significant price escalation due to inflation, supply chain issues, and other challenges outside of municipal control. As Guelph's representative at Queen's Park, how would you ensure that the City of Guelph has support from upper levels of government to address the local infrastructure gap? We start with you, Rochelle.
Thank you. When I met with Mayor Cam Guthrie yesterday, he spoke exactly about this critical issue, needing to make sure that provincial and federal investments enable the City of Guelph to develop fully inclusive and seamless communities. We know that to do that, we do need core investments from provincial levels of government, including to support our transit infrastructure. And that's where we made the Ontario Liberal commitment to ensure that the $1 a ride province-wide is fully supported with provincial investment and at no loss to municipalities. We will also, to achieve our 1.5 million homes built in the next decade, will create the Ontario Home Building Corporation. And that really is designed to alleviate the pressure on overloaded municipalities who are working to both streamline development as well as to get the homes built. And we will support that with the Ontario Home Building Corporation to be able to have full view and oversight on that development.
Thanks, Rochelle. James, how about you?
When I met with Mayor Cam Guthrie today, he also echoed the exact same issues that Guelph is facing through just massive escalation in costs. And through our Green New Democratic deal, we want to highlight that not only do we want to retrofit all government buildings, we want to build green infrastructure and help fix our roads. But one of the biggest factors to increasing costs is our labor shortage. And we want to make sure that we're training skilled professionals to enter the workforce to make sure we have the workforce needed for a green economy and we can continue to grow Ontario into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We've lost our timer box, but we are keeping track off screen, so you may hear me interrupt as needed, although you're all doing a great job. So thank you for that. So Mike, we go to you.
Yeah, Shakiba, escalating costs are significantly impacting, things like the South End Rec Center and other important infrastructure. The Ontario Greens have made a commitment working with the Ontario Big City Mayors, which Mayor Guthrie chairs at the moment, to make substantial commitments to helping alleviate pressure on property taxes and municipal budgets by uploading 50% of transit costs so we can have reliable, affordable, and on-time transit, uploading 50% of social housing costs while maintaining local control, again, to take pressure off of municipal budgets. And I was the MPP that asked the Financial Accountability Officer to look at infrastructure risk for municipalities. It's $6 billion this decade alone due to the climate crisis. That's why we've put forward a $2 billion a year plan to help municipalities retrofit buildings and other infrastructure to be climate resilient, again, taking pressure off of property taxes.
Thank you. Our next question is about broadband. Broadband is so crucial for businesses across the province. What actions would you take to fast track it? James?
For too long, governments have promised to roll out broadband to all rural communities. And we have to ensure that no matter where you are in Ontario, you have equal access to the digital economy. The pandemic quickly showed those who have and have not available broadband. Because as everything moved online, if you did not have a high-speed connection, you couldn't attend class, you couldn't go to school, and you couldn't even work. So what we want to do is we want to make sure every Ontarian has broadband access, including in the rural areas. So our pledge is to finally get it done and roll it out.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, broadband is just absolutely vital to future economic development. I was on the province's COVID Economic Recovery Committee and put forward the recommendations around expanded broadband funding, which was one of the things I did like about the Conservative government's budget. Not a lot of other things, but that I did like. So now it's a matter of rolling that money out faster. We've also put forward a plan to expand the Digital Main Street program, which I helped a number of local businesses in Guelph access during the pandemic so they can compete with the Amazons of the world and others. And we also need to make sure that we have equitable access to digital services, which is one of the reasons library funding is so critically important and why our party has a commitment to finally reverse 2 decades of library funding being frozen and to actually increase it as a vital tool for equitable access to digital services.
Thanks, Mike. And you'll notice our timer is back. Rochelle, tell us about broadband.
Thank you. The Ontario Liberal Plan includes a commitment to ensuring that every Ontarian has access to broadband by 2025 and also includes $300 million loan portfolio for small and medium businesses to invest in the necessary capital and infrastructure upgrades, including digital transformations that we know so many small businesses and medium businesses struggled to get online during this pandemic. I mentioned digital equity, and we know that many people can be excluded from participating in business, healthcare, and education during the pandemic. And so ensuring that folks have access to devices as well as that broadband access is very critical to an inclusive and prosperous Ontario.
Thank you. So another infrastructure question. Guelph is full of sites contaminated by historical industrial activity that could be brought back into productive use with funding from the provincial government. Once remediated, these lands could be used to build housing or new storefronts. How should the Government of Ontario support municipal governments in remediating brownfield sites that are primed for redevelopment? We start with you, Mike.
Yeah, no, it was unfortunate that the previous government cut the brownfield or eliminated the brownfield remediation fund. The Ontario Greens would restore that fund. I mean, I look at the opportunities like on the Imico site, for example, also old and abandoned gas stations and other contaminated sites that with proper financial support from the province can be rehabilitated, made safe, and make those lands available for especially affordable housing sites, and also assisting municipalities in developing more naturalized remediation processes as well. So we can address concerns around soil contamination and how we deal with that, utilizing the best innovations and technologies that are available.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Thank you. The Ontario Liberal Party has committed to expanding the brownfield remediation tax benefit, which would see up to 10 years of property tax holiday on remediated brownfield sites. We know how important it is to unlock many underutilized or unused spaces and places across Ontario as we seek to build 1.5 million homes in 10 years while protecting our vital agricultural lands as well as our greenlands, wetlands, and expanding the greenbelt. To do that, we need to make sure that we're engaging in gentle intensification and focusing on the need to remediate brownfield spaces.
Thank you. James.
I live in the ward just down the street from a massive brownfield that was left over when a corporation decided to cut tails and run. So there's two approaches. We want to make sure that we provide tax incentives through property assessment, tax changes to encourage brownfield development. We also want to prevent any future brownfield development from happening because it should be criminal for any business polluting a land and then deliberately devaluing their property to avoid property tax or other issues. So we want to make sure we prevent any future brownfields from being created, but at the same time tackling the ones we have. And this is an issue close to my heart because I want to see that field just down my street turn into a lovely subdivision I hopefully one day can afford. Thanks.
That question leads well into our housing one. In February, the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force outlined recommendations in their Housing Affordability Report that gave clear direction for the province to increase density, remove exclusionary zoning, prevent abuse of the appeals process, and make sure municipalities are treated as partners in planning. What areas of recommendations does your party support, and do you have any alternative recommendations? We'll start with you, Rochelle.
Thank you. I'm going to actually start with Guelph and talk specifically about the 38,000 deeply affordable permanent supportive housing homes that are named expressly in the Ontario Liberal Plan, with 15,000 of these being directly focused on mental health and addictions housing that we will include wraparound healthcare supports. This has been a need in the city of Guelph to help us achieve our goal to end homelessness, and is a critical part of the commitment that we will make to our community to help us do just that. We also have committed to bold action on 1.5 million homes being built across the province in the next decade, doing that in partnership with municipalities, but not exclusively requiring them to lead this change independently, as we know the many barriers that there are to doing that. And then, as we indicated, we'll have many as of right zoning changes that will allow us to have laneway houses, tiny homes, as well as to develop existing single-family homes into 3-unit individual housing opportunities.
Thanks, Rochelle. James.
I'll get that mute button eventually. As someone who currently is priced out of the housing market, housing is my #1 priority. We are totally in favor of ending exclusionary zoning. We want to be able to build communities, not isolated subdivisions. And we want to allow for gentle densification, because we should have a mix of single family, quadduplexes, apartment buildings, you name it, all within one area, all integrated with commercial buildings, so you can live, work, and play all within that. Because as we transition to a green economy, the best way of cutting emissions is to not commute at all. On top of that, we want to prevent landlords from using rent evictions and other bad practices from driving up rent prices in an area. So as a young person who wants to enter the market and who is currently renting, we have to protect renters, and we have to bring down housing prices so everyone can afford to live and work in their community.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Shakiba. And I think thanks to so many people who have given me feedback around housing affordability, the Ontario Greens have really been leading, especially being the first party to come out and call for an end to exclusionary zoning and to create more housing choices and options, so we can build the 1.5 million homes we need over the next decade without paving over farmland that feeds us, the wetlands that protect us. So making duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes as of right, making it easier for tiny homes, secondary suites, laneway houses, and other housing options. Cracking down on rampant speculation in the housing market, especially vacant homes and corporations buying up homes, so that first-time homebuyers especially are on a level playing field to buy their first home. And finally, having government come to the table. We've made a firm funded commitment for 60,000 permanent supportive housing spaces with wraparound mental health, addictions, and other supports. And we will deliver that for Guelph, because we know there's some great projects close to funding here in Guelph.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to dig a little deeper into affordability and ask some specific questions there. What is your party's plan to fight the rising cost of living and address what is the affordability crisis that everyone is facing? We'll start with you, James.
Inflation, the numbers just came out today. I think it was 6.8%. I've never had a 6.8% raise. So one of the first things we do is want to implement a $20 minimum wage phased in over our first term, and make it also easy for small businesses to access a fund if they're struggling to make sure their employees get what they deserve. Because we truly understand the true cost of living in this province. We want to offer pharmacare, dental care, and mental health care all rolled up into OHIP, so you can pay with your OHIP card, not your credit card. We also want to make sure that housing is affordable. And as Mike said, we have to make sure that housing is for residents, not corporations. So we want to make sure we can keep corporations and large, wealthy landlords out of the market and keep rental prices stable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, a lot of people are deeply concerned about the rising cost of living, period, but especially when it comes to housing, food, and fuel. We've talked a lot about housing, so I want to focus in a bit more on fuel. So we've been through these cycles many times, the 1970s, right prior to the 2008 financial crash. Now with Putin's horrific invasion of Ukraine, global oil shocks have significantly and negatively affected our quality of life, our economy, and the cost of everything. And that's one of the reasons that I believe Ontario should be the global leader in electrifying transportation. We have the mining to manufacturing supply chain to get it done. We need to make electric vehicles affordable for people because they can save so much money. It costs $5 to fill up my electric vehicle. And when it comes to food prices, I just want to say, let's bring in a grocery code of conduct like other jurisdictions have brought in to help protect local farmers and consumers from the increasing concentration we're seeing in retail food markets.
Thanks. Rochelle, how about you?
Thank you. So when we say things like regionally set living wages or increasing minimum wages, we, the Ontario Liberal Party, also really consider small and medium businesses who we know have been really hard hit in the last 2 years. And for some, achieving those wage increases will be a challenge. That's why we've committed to extending that runway, increasing minimum wage in January of 2023, and then working with stakeholders, including businesses, to plan on regional levels the implementation of those regionally set living wages, which in the city of Guelph is $18.10. We also know that we have to put money back in the pockets of families through cuts on transit, which will also improve our action on climate, while at the same time also ensuring access to flexible childcare services that help women like myself participate in the economy while saving us funds that we can actually increase the money in our pockets.
Thank you. So now I'm wondering if you can tell us if your party supports increases to ODSP or Ontario work rates. Community is wondering if so, by how much, and would you tie this rate to inflation? We start with Mike.
Yeah, the Ontario Greens have really led the charge and made this an election issue. We would immediately double social assistance rates and index them to inflation so that people don't live in legislative poverty any longer. And we know that lower income residents spend that money locally supporting small businesses. We also know poverty costs the province $33 billion a year. In addition to that, we need to make sure that wages are keeping up with inflation, which is why we support increases in the minimum wage with a living wage top up to recognize the true cost of living in different communities in the province, providing tax supports for small businesses. I can tell you that as a small business owner to help manage that. And finally, we have to ensure that the most vulnerable in our community have access to housing. And that's why our housing first approach, building 182,000 deeply affordable rental and community-based housing spaces, is so vital to equity in our community.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Thank you. I'm going to actually start with the Ontario Liberal Party's innovative launch of the Basic Income Pilot. And folks might have seen the difference in language that was very intentional in our platform, which is the Basic Income Demonstration Projects. And that is really because what we're embarking on with the basic income approach in the province of Ontario is that under a Liberal government, we will be transforming our income security systems that include our old age security, Ontario Works, and ODSP towards a basic income model. And that's complex work that takes time, the engagement of communities, and those who experience the challenges to be part of that transformation. In the meantime, we have committed to a 20% increase to ODSP rates by July 2023, 10% this year, as well as making really critical changes to the amount of employment income one can earn on OW and ODSP, raising that to $6,000 and changing the definition of spouse so that folks can be in a relationship that doesn't relegate them to poverty.
Thank you. James, to you.
Right away, if elected, we want to have a 20% increase to ODSP and OW rates, and then double at the end of our first year. We also understand that if this is not enough, we want to work with stakeholders to ensure that everyone on ODSP and OW is living well above the poverty line, because we should not have legislative poverty. Instead, we should have people who can live and reinvest in their community. Every dollar spent on ODSP gets reinvested into our community. And if we're more than happy to hand out corporate welfare checks, we can do the exact same to our residents so they can reinvest it back into our province. We also want to make sure that everyone on ODSP and OW have an affordable place to live, and they have access to pharmacare, dental care, and mental health care so that they can thrive and live in their community. Thank you.
Thank you. Rochelle, you were touching on this already, but we will ask all the candidates what your party's stance is on universal basic income. Rochelle, we do start with you.
Thank you. Under the previous Liberal government, we implemented a universal basic income pilot. And we know that the evidence is really clear on UBI. And that is that when folks have those dollars in their pocket, those dollars are invested in local communities, in local businesses, and that broader provincial economies will thrive. And through those implementation those pilot projects, what we also saw is that when they were drastically and unexpectedly cut by the Ford government, many folks struggled to recover and lost that dignity that they had once been afforded. We have committed to re-implementing the basic income demonstration projects, and I will be advocating that Guelph be considered as one of these sites, recognizing the great base and foundation we have as an Ontario health team, as well as our commitment to ending homelessness. And so our party firmly stands behind a commitment to universal basic income.
Thank you. James, what's your party stance on UBI?
We're committed to relaunching the pilot program. And on my own personal note, I spent my life's work working on processes to make things more efficient for companies. There's a lot of James Pars out there doing the exact same work through automation. And we need something as we move towards a more automated future that makes sure as jobs transition that no one falls behind. So I fully support UBI because it is needed. Because as we move towards an AI and automated future, UBI will be critical. So we back restarting the pilot to making sure we get it right and then hopefully launching it in the future.
Thank you. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, one of the reasons I got involved in the Green Party initially was the party's bold commitment to a basic income, and that commitment remains. And the first and most important step in delivering a basic income in this province is to immediately double social assistance rates, to bring people on Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support up to the low income cutoff level. And that it will be the major financial commitment that will be needed to actually deliver on a basic income. I want to talk about some of the advantages of it. First of all, the current government talks a lot about eliminating red tape. The people in our society who experience the most red tape are people who are on social assistance. And it is completely an undignified way to live, to always have to be filling out all kinds of paperwork and going through so many hoops to access benefits to barely survive. Let's eliminate that red tape and let's get rid of legislative poverty, and we will all benefit.
Thank you. So now I'd like to know how you or your party intends on expanding the Accessibilities for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AODA. Will you propose any grants that will help businesses achieve accessibility to ensure physical access isn't a barrier to local small businesses? James, we start with you.
Our government is fully committed to a full implementation of all of the Accessibility for Ontarians and Disabilities Act, because we understand in order to have a thriving community, everyone should be able to go wherever they want. Because it's under our charter rights for the freedom of movement, but freedom of movement is not free for everyone. So we want to make sure that we provide grants for small businesses so they can implement the acts. And we also want to make sure our government is accessible. So doing a comprehensive review to make sure all government resources are accessible, not only physically, but visually, audibly, and anything else that might hold someone back from getting into a government service.
Thank you. To you, Mike.
Yeah, the AODA Act was a historic piece of legislation in Ontario's history. Unfortunately, governments have been dragging their feet, and we're likely not going to be able to, as a province, meet our 2025 deadline. First of all, I would say no more government infrastructure buildings should be built that are not fully accessible. I can't believe that's still happening in, what is it, 2022. Secondly, we need to mandate universal design in our building code. So it is far less expensive to build things right in the first place than retrofit later. And finally, we know we have a lot of historic and heritage buildings, particularly in fantastic downtowns like Guelph. And we need to make sure government has a grant support program to help those small businesses in particular ensure that they're accessible for everyone in this province.
Thank you. To you, Rochelle.
Thank you. I was really pleased to co-lead our consultations with folks who were experiencing disability and accessibility challenges in the province of Ontario. And one of the greatest advocacy messages that they shared with us is that so many spaces are not accessible for their inclusion. And there was an actual saturated focus on those struggling with environmental sensitivities and really being challenged to access businesses as well as healthcare environments. As a healthcare leader who is accountable to the AODA inclusion and disability standards, I also know that it is very costly on fixed flatline-based budgets to make those infrastructure upgrades. And so it is imperative that there are granting and infrastructure investments, and those are clearly stated in our Ontario Liberal Plan to help businesses and not-for-profits achieve the standards that are so vital.
Thank you. Ontarians living with disabilities live 40% below the poverty threshold, and some express that they have no option other than to seek medically assisted suicide. What will your party do to ensure that the quality of life for those with disabilities is raised to a reasonable standard? Mike?
Yeah, it's just tragic. Shakiba, I can't tell you how many members of our community I've worked with prior to being elected, but especially over the last 4 years, just can't survive living in legislated poverty. And we have a responsibility as a society to meet people's basic needs. And that's exactly why the Ontario Greens are calling for the immediate doubling of ODSP supports and lifting the threshold for income before any clawbacks would happen, tripling it to $600 a month. This is just the right thing to do. It's an investment that's worth making. And I'm proud to say that during this election campaign, we were the first to push on this. And even the Ford government now is saying they're going to amend their budget and increase some ODSP rates by 5%. But that's not enough. We need to double them so people do not live in legislated poverty.
Thank you. James, what will your party do to ensure the quality of life for those with disabilities is raised?
We're planning on doing an immediate increase of 20% to ODSP, and again, doubling it after a year, but also offering pharmacare, dental care, and mental health care. But again, this isn't enough. People on ODSP are suffering, like Mike said. We have to remove the red tape, and we have to ensure that regardless of where you are in Ontario, you can have access to affordable housing. Our current ODSP rates have not kept up with inflation, and it is the sheer fact we're even having this conversation, debate what's livable, is one of the issues. None of us even have lived on ODSP rates, and none of us can even do it. We need to address this now, and we can't put this off any longer because people are suffering and people are living in just the worst conditions. So we need to fix this. So I'm hoping that whatever government gets elected, I hope NDP, ODSP rates is the #1 priority.
Thank you. We're going to move on and ask some questions related to business competitiveness and economic recovery.
I think I need to answer that one first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rochelle. I'm so sorry. To you.
Thank you. I am an incredible advocate for Ontario Disability Support Program, and in fact had a real experience with my own party when we initially learned that our announcement wasn't going to be quite what we wanted it to be, and the voices that we heard from those who advocated for increases to the ODSP rate. And we worked as a party. We worked as a team. Those who were part of our income and disability squad came together with senior staff, including Stephen Del Duca, to consider our commitment to increasing income security for those with disabilities. And we were successful. And the words of those who gave that input was actually read by our leader and informed that change, which is why we saw direct changes to the definition of spouse, as well as income employment thresholds raising to $6,000. It's that type of party that I'm really proud to stand with, because it means that the voices of my community will affect change at Queen's Park.
Thanks, Rochelle. And you're actually going to start with the answer on the next question as we move to economic recovery. Supply chain issues have hampered business competitiveness throughout the pandemic. What actions would you take to ensure the resilience of supply chains?
I think one of the things that we really recognized as across the globe is how important domestic production is in addressing timely supply chain challenges. When we were first launching our assessment center here in Guelph, the testing site where so many of us have been to determine whether or not we have been impacted by COVID, we actually had acute supply chain issues of the nasopharyngeal swabs as they were produced in Italy, which we know at the beginning of the pandemic was underwater. And we had acute supply chain issues with the one thing we actually needed to help control the pandemic's impact on our community. We saw the same with vaccine production and so many of the core equipment and materials that we needed to keep our economy running. So the Ontario Liberal Party will invest in domestic production and innovation and research in Ontario, keeping Ontario businesses able to participate and supply us with the things we need to have economic prosperity.
Thank you. James?
With our Green New Democratic Deal, we want to re-kickstart the Ontario economy by bringing manufacturing back to Ontario in a sustainable way. We also, through my own personal lived experiences, I work in the logistics sector, one of the biggest things is getting more drivers on the road. And we also, not only drivers, we need skilled trades. So we want to really make sure that we're prioritizing the jobs we need for the future. It be drivers, construction workers, millwrights, pipe fitters. We need people to get the work done. I went to school with a bunch of engineers and none of them can swing a hammer. We need people who can get the work done, and that's why we're offering grants and loan and turning loans into grants for OSAP for people going into the trades and people just getting education, because we need to train the next generation to fill the labor shortages that we're currently facing.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, the fragility of our supply chains obviously highlighted during the pandemic and are critical to post-pandemic recovery. We've put forward a green technology and innovation fund, as well as a commitment to public procurement to support procuring from domestic businesses and to repatriating supply chains. I mean, I've met with one entrepreneur, even looking in this region, to set up a microchip factory, given the critical role Guelph plays in the automotive parts supply chain. I think Ontario is perfectly positioned, especially when it comes to mining to manufacturing, in electrification of vehicles as well as storage. We have a huge opportunity to stop shipping $25 billion out of our province to buy fossil fuels by electrifying transportation. And finally, we have to support our local food supply chains by not paving over the farmland that feeds us.
Thank you. The next question is, what will you and your party do for small and medium-sized businesses that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic? James?
The pandemic is not over and our economic troubles are not behind us. And the Ontario NDP fully recognize that. That's why we're offering 2 more waves of small business loan grants to make sure that small businesses can get out of their current COVID and recover and thrive for the future. Because without small businesses, Guelph would not be the same Guelph it is today. So we have to make sure that we protect the mom and pop businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, because for too long, we've been making legislation for large corporations and the Walmarts of the world. One thing that was truly heartbreaking was seeing large businesses like Walmart open, selling plasma TVs when people were going for their bananas, when mom and pop shops were boarded up because they were no longer allowed to open. So we want to make sure that small businesses remain open and have provided the grants that they need to thrive into the future.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, one of the things I'm proud of during the pandemic was the role I played in really navigating through Queen's Park, the commercial eviction ban, to support small businesses so they weren't evicted. But I also learned from that we need changes in legislation around the way in which commercial tenants are regulated so we can provide those kinds of supports moving forward. I've been a strong advocate for increasing funding and expanding the staycation tax credit to also be able to support the hospitality sector, which was one of the hardest hit, in addition to the tourism sector. A strong supporter of additional funding for the arts sector, because many of the arts organizations were first to close, been last to open. And finally, providing small businesses with tools, such as expanding Digital Main Street and other tech tools so they can compete against the big box stores and the Amazons. We should have never, ever again in Ontario should we close small businesses while big box stores remain open.
Thank you. Rochelle.
Thank you. We will eliminate incorporation fees for new start businesses, as well as provide at least a 2-year holiday for corporate sales tax, corporate tax on those businesses, small to medium, who have been most impacted by the pandemic. We also commit to 10 paid sick days. Again, circling back to what I had indicated about ensuring businesses have the tools in order to implement these much needed but assertive policies, we will reimburse small to medium businesses up to $200 a day, ensuring that they have the investments needed to provide this incredibly important economic and health benefit. And then finally, we will initiate a $300 million loan portfolio to support businesses in upgrading their capital and digital connections, while also investing in the arts and culture sector as well.
Thank you. Now, you've all touched on the need to reduce red tape. What steps will your party take to make doing business easier in our province? Mike?
First of all, I believe it's important that we rethink our regulatory framework in Ontario. Something the Ontario Greens have proposed is to look at a risk assessment and outcome-based regulations, because oftentimes regulations written for large corporations are not applicable to small businesses, and one-size-fits-all solutions are inappropriate. One thing I do want to make clear, though, is the current government oftentimes refers to vital environmental protections that protect our health, protect the places we love, protect our farmland, our wetlands, and our waterways as red tape. And I don't believe that's red tape. That's protecting people, and it's protecting the places we love. And so we need to have appropriate regulations in place to serve our community. And we also need to make sure that we have a regulatory framework that provides a level playing field for businesses in the province.
Thank you. Rochelle.
Thank you. One of the things that we learned across the pandemic is just how critical community-based planning and solutions really are, and including needing to make sure that processes are streamlined and that we have direct communication with decision makers, whether that is on provincial, federal, or municipal levels. In order to make sure that we streamline red tape, we need to actually bring together those three levels of government. And that's a commitment that Stephen Del Duca made at a recent chamber presentation, and that I wholeheartedly stand behind. When we bring together federal, provincial, and municipal levels of government, as well as community business leaders, we are able to actually identify problems and create community-based solutions, including ensuring that we have the appropriate planning for immigration coming to our communities, job sources for growing innovation that's growing in our community, and that businesses are supported with the workforce they need to prosper.
Thank you. And to you, James?
One of the many ways we want to reduce red tape, and I also want to echo what Mike said, when we talk about reducing red tape, we have to ensure that we keep environmental protections because they're meant to ensure that we have a world we can live and breathe in the future. But one of the many ways we want to do it is to ensure that small businesses can have equal access to government contracts and grants. Large corporations can easily hire individual people on their staff to be able to easily apply for these grants or even to get new contracts. Small businesses, when you're just busy just trying to get product out of the door, you don't have the time and resources to fill out the lengthy grants. So the NDP want to level the playing field to make sure that small and medium-sized businesses can get equal access to government contracts, because some of these contracts can mean the difference between keeping your business small and growing it to the next level. And we have to make sure we grow from the bottom up.
Thank you. And we're going to stay a little bit on trend here. I'd like to know what action your party would take to remove inter-provincial trade barriers and reduce barriers to foreign credential recognition. Rochelle?
Thank you. The amount of barriers that folks have experienced being able to practice in the fields that they've studied and loved internationally before immigrating to Canada are insurmountable. We have pharmacy assistants who are fully trained pharmacists, as well as fully trained medical professionals driving Ubers and providing us with delivery services. What we know is that we actually need to streamline and cut the red tape on many of the processes that allow these folks who have been trained and are skilled to work in their fields of choice and the fields of choice that we actually are in dire need of skilled workforce and labor. If we're going to build 1.5 million homes, we will need to transform our approach to skilled labor in the province of Ontario. And that's why the Ontario Liberals are talking about economic immigration policies, much like those in Quebec.
Thank you. James, how will your party, what actions would your party take to remove interprovincial trade barriers and reduce barriers to foreign credential recognition?
I think Rochelle hit the nail on the head with that one. We have such a skill shortage, and it was highlighted no more so than during the pandemic, when we had shortages of nurses, PSW workers, and other essential medical personnel, but yet we had highly trained medical professionals that moved their entire family to Canada for a better life, but we told them that we didn't believe that you got the right education, or we made them face loads of red tape. The Ontario NDP wanted to make it easier for medically trained professionals to practice in Ontario. And that we believe if we do that, that will allow 15,000 additional medical personnel to instantly enter the workforce to fill the vacancies that we desperately need filled. Because if we continue to keep barriers up, then we won't have the proper infrastructure in place for the next pandemic.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I think I'll start with interprovincial trade barriers, which I still understand why in Canada we cannot break down interprovincial trade barriers. I mean, it's been talked about for decades, and it's a huge drain on our economic success, and it creates significant disruptions in business planning, particularly for businesses that all operate in multiple provinces. And it's related to credential of workers as well, because some of those interprovincial trade barriers prevent people who are trained and skilled in other provinces from working in Ontario. Absolutely committed to recognizing and fast-tracking foreign trained, particularly healthcare workers, to be able to operate here in Ontario. And the last one I want to talk about is trade barriers we produce in our own province. I'm working with entrepreneurs here in Guelph to say, let's liberate local beer, wine, and spirits and start having little boutique stores that enable us to support local farmers, vintners, and distillers in our communities as well.
Thank you. Now, we all know this to be true. The pandemic shutdowns really hurt small businesses. What will you do to ensure that we can stay open safely going forward? Does your party have a pandemic preparedness plan that business can count on? James?
Yes, we do. Starts off by being transparent and listening to the experts. It's one thing having a science advisory table. It's another thing muzzling them and not listening. We want to make sure that any steps that we do prioritizes keeping kids in schools and small businesses open. It was heartbreaking. And again, I will bring up the same task. It was heartbreaking seeing all of downtown shuttered, but Walmart fully allowed to open. It made no sense, and it favored large corporations that had the ability to quickly adapt. Through lessons learned through proper ventilation, through masking, and other social distancing measures, we shouldn't have to do a full lockdown again. But if it is needed, we'll be fully transparent and fully recognize that we need to prioritize small and medium-sized businesses and keeping kids in school because their mental health is also very important.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, we absolutely need to be utilizing all tools to, one, avoid any further closures of our schools and of our economy. Once again, I'll say never again in Ontario should small businesses be closed while large businesses were able to be open. We need a level playing field in the province for all businesses. One of the key components of our pandemic preparedness plan is to make the Chief Medical Officer of Health an independent officer of the legislature, because I think the public and businesses need confidence that we're getting transparent, accurate, science and evidence-based advice. Politicians should still, the elected officials should be making the final decisions, but we need some independence within that particularly vital role. And then finally, let's invest in the healthcare capacity we need in this province. That was one of the drivers that led to some of the decisions government made. Let's make the investment to expand capacity.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Thank you. The word that you said, Shakiba, that completely evaded us under the current government during this pandemic is the word plan. As we all faced and looked down the hall at the oncoming pandemic, in March, I was actually with my friend Mike at Queen's Park, and I was watching opposition leaders shout at the current government asking for a plan. And they maintained there was one, but as a healthcare leader in the city of Guelph, I knew they didn't actually have a plan. And that evolved into chaotic decision-making that affected businesses, healthcare, and everyday Ontarians over the course of the last 2 years. The Ontario Liberal government does have a plan, and as my colleagues have said, it is to listen to the science, and it's also to engage with community leaders and business leaders to ensure that we do have that preparedness that is so vital and was not in place before this pandemic.
Thank you. We're now going to dig in a little bit more into jobs in the workforce. The 2022 Ontario Chamber of Commerce Economic Report found that over 60% of businesses are experiencing a talent and labor shortage. We hear about it every day. 40% of new jobs created in the next decade are expected to be in the skilled trades, but only 26% of young people aged 13 to 24 are considering a career in these areas. How will your party support additional development of the skilled trades in Ontario and reskilling opportunities? Mike, we start with you.
Yeah, so encouraging young people and providing a pathway to the trades is vital to addressing the labor shortages we're facing in Ontario right now. And it's going to be critically important if we're going to build a climate-ready economy and take advantage of the 65 million new jobs worldwide that are going to be created in the low carbon climate economy. We've made a firm commitment to backing that up with free tuition for 60,000 young people to access the trades in college with a guaranteed apprenticeship and changes to apprenticeship ratios to allow that to happen so we can quickly provide the incentives to ramp up the labor force we need to address current labor shortages and to ensure Ontario is well positioned to be a global leader in the new emerging markets of the new climate economy.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Thank you. My 14-year-old son, Charles, goes to Bishop Macdonell next year, and he was so excited to see that construction foundations and construction management were one of his optional choices. Our leader, Stephen Del Duca, is clear also in his assertions that we need to be much more intentionally linking the job demand that we have in the province of Ontario with our education system, starting early in high school, to make sure that we are talking to students about where they have the best opportunities for economic prosperity in their future lives. When we don't do that, we have students graduating with extreme levels of student debt and an inability to get employment in the fields that they have worked so hard, and they were misinformed and misled in that commitment that they thought they could have that economic prosperity. We also know that immigration changes to ensure that we have skilled labor forces and are making inclusive job markets are also really critical to meeting this goal.
Thank you. James?
Talking about students who graduated with massive debt and who were misled, I will now start talking. I went to school for engineering, and I caught the bug at school at John F. Ross because I started taking a lot of trades classes through manufacturing, carpentry, and I really loved doing it. If I could redo it, I probably wouldn't have got my engineering degree. I would have got my ticket instead, because frankly, there's so much more money being a tradesperson in Ontario than there is an engineer. The hours are better, the lifestyle is better, and your overall health and safety is better. But unfortunately, people don't see that. So we do need to launch a better PR campaign to make sure we direct kids to where they're needed and where they'll be happy. We also want to make sure that if kids go into the trades, that they can get their education paid for by turning OSAP loans into grants, because we do need to make sure that we have a highly skilled trade force for the future, and not students overburdened with debt.
Thank you. We also know that to meet our labor force shortages, we'll have to support Canada's immigration targets. I'm wondering how your party will do so. And we'll start with you, Rochelle.
Thank you. In our platform commitment, we have committed to the creation of new minister positions, and that really is to strengthen the focus and also the accountability on ensuring that the outcomes that we so desperately need are in place. And one of those new minister positions is an immigration minister that will support newcomers to work in their field. And also will develop relationships with business to ensure that we are streamlining economic immigrants into the right communities where demand is high. I think we also need to make sure that there are many other inclusions in communities, such as available housing, as well as income supports for settling immigrants. And we need to make sure that that's in place so that we actually can stabilize folks who too often move to this community for a promise of a better future and end up struggling in poverty, not in their field of choice.
James?
We have to make sure when new Canadians come, that the path is open to them. My partner has gone through the immigration process, and I can tell you it's marred by red tape. She's taken the same English test 4 or 6 different times. So there's definitely rooms of improvement through working with the federal government to making sure that when we attract good talent, the talent's encouraged to stay. On top of that, new Canadians, if they do come over, they get their degrees recognized, because currently through engineering, accounting, and healthcare, too often than not, they're not recognized and they're unable to fully contribute back to our economy. So we have to make sure that we make it easier for international degrees to be recognized, and to make sure that once they are set up here, that they're provided with mental health care, pharmacare, and dental care. So regardless of where you are, your income, you can have your basic needs met.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, so working with the federal government in partnership to ensure that we have strong immigration to Ontario is vital to the vibrancy and vitality of our communities, the diversity of our province, and addressing the needs of our economy. And we have to make sure the right community infrastructures and supports are in place. First is housing. We simply have a lack of housing supply in the province. I mean, I've met with businesses who are literally renting hotel rooms to provide a place for their workers, in some cases, to live. That's one of the reasons that our housing affordability strategy and ramping up supply of housing is so vitally important. We need other community structures and supports in place as well, which is why we've advocated for changing the funding formula in education to provide more English as a second language supports and other supports for newcomers to be able to fully and equitably integrate into our communities.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the topic of education, although this one, there's a good overlap here around skills and skills development, because we know that the looming talent shortage will have an impact on Ontario's economic growth as businesses and communities like Guelph compete for talent. Stokes Economics found that Ontario will need to fill more than 925,000 jobs over the next decade that will require a university education. We also know that there are significant demands for skilled labor and college education talent, making workforce shortages great. What would your government do to ensure that Ontario's post-secondary sector is well positioned to address this talent gap? And how can the provincial government better support post-secondary education institutions to expand these necessary student spaces? James.
As a student who is, as someone who's recently graduated, one of the major things we're promising is turning OSAP loans into grants, because we believe that when you graduate, you shouldn't be burdened with a financial debt because you determined to get a degree that was needed for the economy. We also want to make sure that housing is available. I met with the University of Guelph, and they want to double their engineering program, call out to Guelph, but unfortunately, there's not the housing to support it. Due to the pandemic, a lot of rooms that were rented out are now turned into home offices, so there's definitely housing shortages for students. So through getting rid of OSAP interest, turning OSAP loans into grants, and ensuring that students have adequate housing, we can at least make it slightly easier for them to get the degrees that they need to enter the workforce.
Thank you. Mike, how will your party better support post-secondary education institutions?
By ending the chronic underfunding of post-secondary education in this province. We have the lowest per capita funding for post-secondary education of any province in the country. This started in the mid-1990s, and it's been getting worse and worse every year since. So at the very least, we've made a funding commitment in our platform to raise per student funding at least to the national average. So we can start properly funding our post-secondary educations to provide the education students deserve from quality standpoint, and also the vital research that post-secondary education provides. But we also need to make sure it's affordable. So we would reverse the Ford government's cuts to student assistant programs, and we would increase funding for them and convert them from loans to grants so students don't graduate with crushing levels of debt.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Thank you. Yes, that crushing level of debt and mismatched skills to job market is some of the great challenges that students graduating from post-secondary education are facing. How many teachers have we met who've been waiting on our tables, or how many folks have we met who are fully trained and skilled but just can't find work in their specialized field? The Ontario Liberals will ensure that we are really focusing on employer-led training and education programs in the province of Ontario, recognizing that that is really a pathway to matching our skills with the great needs of those businesses who are growing our economy. In addition to that, we will restore the cuts made to OSAP. As a student who needed to rely on that, that really is a barrier for so many of those who are living in poverty and low income. And we will also ensure that we have free career counseling to all Ontario students.
Thank you. And if we look further down the stream, what actions will your party take to ensure the province has the necessary supply of trained early childhood educators to support the implementation of the Canada-Ontario Early Learning and Childcare Agreement? Mike, we start with you.
Well, first of all, let's just take a moment to celebrate the fact that we have a Canadian agreement now with every province to deliver affordable, accessible childcare. This is decades overdue and is just vital to equity, especially for women accessing the labor force and the economy. The Ontario Greens have made a commitment to a minimum wage of $25 an hour for early childhood educators. If Manitoba can do it, Ontario can do it. We know that if we're going to truly deliver on affordable, accessible childcare, we need to drastically expand the number of childcare spaces that are available, ensure that access to them are flexible from a timing perspective, and we're going to have the labor force to deliver on that. And we won't be able to attract people to an ECE career if we don't pay them fair wages.
Thank you. James?
Mike hit the nail on the head on that one. We have to make sure that our early childhood educators are properly compensated. In order to just live in Guelph and have and rent affordably, the average income needed is between $70,000 to $80,000. So we want to start off by making the minimum wage for early childhood educators at $25 an hour. It's not quite up where it needs to be, but it's a good start, because it's ridiculous to believe that our early childhood educators, the people responsible for taking care of our kids, training them for the next level, are underpaid. Because I met with an early childhood educator at one of my events, and she talked about how she loved to take care of kids, but she had to leave the industry because she no longer could afford the rent she was willing to pay. And she didn't believe going into debt to pursue her career choice was the right choice. So we have to make sure we properly respect all workers and making sure that they get fair wages for the work that they do.
Thank you. And to you, Rochelle.
Thank you. I wanted to start off by thanking our local MP, Lloyd Longfield, and our federal counterparts for the incredible leadership to make this what was once a vision or a dream in the country of Canada an actual reality. And what we know about childcare is that it encourages inclusion in the economy for women like myself, and then it also ensures that families have more funding in their pockets in order to make ends meet. It requires a full labor supply of early childhood educators. And that's why the Ontario Liberal Party is ensuring that there is free tuition for early childhood educators to ensure that we actually are streaming folks into this field that is going to be so integral to our economic success. We also need to ensure that there is a flexible range of providers, both evening and weekends, as well as overnights, as we know that our healthcare and our manufacturing industries rely on just that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a pretty comprehensive environmental question. What role do conservation, retrofits, renewable energy, electric vehicles, and nuclear energy production play in your plan to ensure that communities are prepared for, protected from, and supported in managing the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events? Rochelle.
Is there 2 minutes, Shakiba? Okay, so that's a huge question. And so the Ontario Liberal Party will absolutely ensure that there are rebates both for municipalities, not-for-profits, businesses, and individuals to implement retrofits in our homes and businesses across our communities. And the reason we need to do that is policy investments and implementation need to actually be drivers for the outcomes that it is that we wish to accomplish. And if we are going to cut emissions in half by 2030 in the province of Ontario, then we are going to need to invest in policy levers that will help us to do just that. In addition to that, we will have electric vehicle rebates, including charging equipment. And that's really important for families like myself that need to transport dogs and hockey equipment, that we can afford the vehicles that actually will reduce those emissions. And so yes, the Ontario Liberal Party does include many policy levers to help us achieve the type of actionable, bold climate change policy that we need to by 2030 and beyond.
Thank you. James?
Through the Green New Democratic deal, we cover a lot of the issues that you've highlighted in your question, but I'll just focus on a few. Our goal is to have all new housing, residential, industrial buildings be net zero by 2030 because we want to reduce our use of electricity and gas to heat and power our homes because we want to be net zero by 2035 and reduce our emissions in half by 2035 and be fully net zero by 2050. We also want to have an aggressive home retrofit program where we're retrofitting 5% of all the buildings in Ontario every single year to ensure that they're net zero, again, reducing our overall consumption. We want to roll out the very first EV strategy to have to encourage all future sales of cars by 2030 to be electric. But most importantly, we not only should focus on putting more EV cars on the road, we have to put more EV buses on the road. Because if we can have transit for everyone, then we need less cars for everyone.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I'm just proud to say that the former Environment Commissioner of Ontario, Diane Sachs, was the lead author on the Ontario Greens Climate Action Plan, which is the most detailed and ambitious plan any political party, including the Green Party, has ever put forward in Ontario's history that shows a year-by-year, sector-by-sector analysis of how we can cut climate pollution in half by 2030 and be real net zero by 2045. Do it in a way that helps people save money, primarily by saving energy and electrifying our transportation and home heating systems, and shows how we can do it in a way that Ontario can be the leader in the emerging markets of the new climate economy. And Guelph is particularly well positioned to be a global leader, given all the low carbon industries and businesses we have. And I keep saying, let's export more Guelph to the rest of Ontario. And finally, we absolutely have to protect nature, and conservation authorities play a vital role in doing that.
Thank you. I did give a couple of extra seconds to everybody because it was a pretty full question. You did all also touch on some transportation, and I have a question regarding this for you. How will your party fill public transportation gaps that have resulted from the withdrawal of regional bus services? James?
First of all, I always like to say in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, transportation and free mobility is under it, but yet transportation is not free for all of us. So we want to expand inner-city transit so it takes only an hour to get to Hamilton, not 3. We want to make sure we have all-day go between KW, Guelph, and Toronto to make sure that I can get to Toronto without having to take 3 or 4 different buses. I want to make sure that we provide 50% 50% costing towards municipalities so they can grow their transit networks. And we also want to have a fully electrified bus transit fleet by 2050, because going electric is the way of the future, and the government and the NDP feel the government need to lead the way. So doing all of this, I hope will make a more equitable, clean world for all Ontarians, because if we can freely move, then we can freely spend and we can grow our economy.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of the local Link the Watershed transit advocacy group that's put forward, I believe, a bold, doable, very practical and affordable plan to provide intercity bus service between Guelph and KW, Guelph and Cambridge, Brantford, Hamilton, express direct bus routes to Toronto, as well as linking some of the smaller communities in the region who need access into Guelph. The Ontario Greens platform fully reflects this, with a funding commitment to bring on 4,000 electric buses so we can triple transit use over the next decade. Absolutely will continue to be a strong supporter for all-day two-way go, and doing it in a way that respects the needs of our community. We got to get weekend train service going in Guelph. I hear that over and over again from folks. And then finally, uploading 50% of municipal transit costs to help municipalities continue to deliver reliable service while taking pressure off of property taxes.
Thank you. we're coming up to the final couple of questions.
Hey, Shakiba, you keep forgetting me.
Michelle, our order of operation there, sorry. To you.
Thank you. Transformative and bold climate and transportation policy included our Ontario Liberal commitment to $1 a ride province-wide. And when we have been advocating in Guelph for decades for increased frequency for intercity transit, especially two-way all-day go, we have been doing so, and I've been doing so without really fully understanding what the barrier is. And I've learned that really quickly. And in that there is a piece of CN track that does not allow us to have the level of frequency that we need for that transit to run to Union Station and include the Kitchener track. That $1.2 billion basket weave investment, which is more than I thought I would know about train infrastructure at this point of the campaign, is something that's in the Ontario Liberal budget, and $1 a day both ways is something that I'm really proud and will be taking advantage of.
Thank you. Thanks, Rochelle. Okay, on to the next few questions. We always talk about Guelph's place on the corridor or the map. What opportunities do you see for our region to grow economically and socially? Mike?
Yeah, being along the innovation corridor is a huge advantage for Guelph. And it's one of the reasons we have to partner with CN to make sure we have the all-day two-way go service, particularly when it comes to agricultural innovation. And you think of what it's going to take to feed a hungry world, especially given the climate impacts we're feeling and experiencing. Precision agriculture, bioproducts and biomaterials, renewable energy, green technologies, water conservation technologies. I mean, so many groundbreaking innovations are coming out of Guelph, and our plan would help scale and commercialize those innovations to generate the prosperity and jobs to continue the prosperity that we have in this region and in this community.
Thank you. Rochelle.
Thank you. We were really incredibly lucky to win the federal infrastructure grant to enable us to plan and implement our Futures circular food economy. And that's because we are home to an incredible global leader in both agriculture and food science at the University of Guelph, as well as many of the technologies and food security systems that can actually make this goal a reality. And it is expanding businesses, it is enabling local agriculture to grow, and also ensuring that we are having the 17% of those facing food insecurity in our city also have their needs met by accessible food. We also have green tech and tech innovators and businesses locally who have lost during this pandemic as those contracts have been slashed. And that is something that the Ontario Liberal Plan seeks to restore to ensure that we can meet our goal of having a fully clean energy source by 2030.
Thank you. James?
I believe Guelph is in one of the best positions to position itself for future growth in any sector. We've got Linamar to help us lead the way in the EV revolution so we can make the parts for clean vehicles in the future. We have the University of Guelph, and as a fellow mechanical engineering grad from there, I can say the work that they're doing in environmental, water, and sustainability through home retrofits there is next level. So prayer, making sure the University of Guelph gets the funding, continue to go in just working on clean tech. Guelph has the ability to grow, but one of the things holding it back is how isolated we are. We're not like the KW surrounded by 3 cities, and we're not like Toronto surrounded by the GTA. We need all-day transit and we need all-day go to make sure that we can get to the meetings in the GTA or KW. And if we can be fully connected, then we can be fully collaborative so we can grow with everyone else.
Thanks. And now our final question before closing statements. There's a lot to get done over the next 4 years that we've just discussed, and everything has a cost attached to it. How is your party going to prioritize the spending and investment required? Rochelle?
Thank you. The fully costed Ontario Liberal Plan, A Place to Grow, does look at a balanced budget in the year 26-27 fiscal year. And that's 1 year earlier than the books are projected to budget under the current government's plan, and also includes the much needed investments that we will need to continue to manage the pandemic that is still very much alive and well in the province of Ontario, as well as recover post-pandemic. We also know that it's really important to have that continued fiscal accountability and review, and that's why we have committed to doing a full and comprehensive review of our province's books and spending within the first 100 days of government.
Thank you. James?
Our number one priority when it comes to spending is taking the privatization of long-term care. During the first waves of the pandemic, they bore the brunt of the stresses we face. We have to make sure we reinvest in long-term care and home care, and we reinvest in our healthcare so we're ready for the next pandemic. When it comes to how we're going to pay for it, I can make the pledge that we will not raise taxes on low and middle income families and individuals, especially here in Guelph, where we are one of the highest property tax jurisdictions. And so we want to make sure we're not adding any undue stresses to families during this difficult time. After that, we have to make sure we start rolling out our Green New Democratic Deal so we can have a future to live for on a planet that is breathable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, the pandemic has certainly revealed what I think a lot of us already knew anyway, the cracks in the foundations of our systems of care. And we can't paper over those cracks. We actually have to fix the foundation, which is why we have to invest in expanded healthcare capacity, better public and stronger public education, lifting people out of poverty and addressing the inequities in our society, addressing the housing affordability crisis, and we have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. The Ontario Greens have put forward a fully costed platform that puts us on a path to balance that's similar to what the current government's path is, but with different priorities. For example, I'm the only MPP who voted against the license plate sticker gimmick because that drains billions out of our treasury that should be going to supporting good public services. So I encourage you to check out our fully costed platform and ask me any detailed questions related to its costing.
Thank you. We will now move to closing statements. Closing statements will be presented in reverse order from opening remarks, and you have 90 seconds. Mike Schreiner, from the Green Party of Ontario, to you.
Yeah, it's just been, once again, I just want to say what an honor it's been serving as your MPP over the last 4 years. And together, we as a community, Team Guelph, has fought for and delivered on a number of things to benefit our community. Together, working across all levels of government and across all sectors of our community, we've come through 2 turbulent years of the pandemic. And I know there's so much more work to be done. And my commitment to you is to continue to work hard, doing politics differently, working across party lines, holding government accountable, and being a strong advocate for Guelph at Queen's Park. My commitments are to deliver on addressing the housing affordability crisis, investing in and expanding and strengthening our healthcare capacity, especially by investing in prioritizing people, making sure mental health services and supports are available to people, and that we have the permanent supportive housing we need with the supports in place to support our neighbors. And finally, to ensure that we have a plan to address the climate emergency that is here, to do it in a way that strengthens our economy and addresses the affordability challenges so many people in Guelph are currently facing. I hope I can earn your trust and earn your vote again in this election.
Thank you. To you, James Parr from the Ontario New Democratic Party.
I want to start off in saying thank you very much, Shakiba, for hosting this phenomenal debate, and also to my fellow candidates for keeping it civil. None of us use the rebuttal icon at all, which goes to show how we're all are working towards making Ontarians better and not scoring points on one another. As a candidate, if elected, my priorities will put Guelph and Ontario first. I want to make sure that parents that are looking after their kids while working their jobs or frontline pandemic heroes are properly taken care of. I want to make sure that students who are entering the workforce have jobs that they can be happy to be entering, and that business owners who are taking care of their employees can continue to thrive in this economy. Our platform wants to make Ontario more affordable for everyone. We want more money in your pocket by taking on pharmacare, dental care, and mental health care so you can pay with your OHIP card, not your credit card. We want to make sure we fix the housing crisis and improve our public transit. And we want to make sure that we give small businesses a leg up on big corporations. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we address climate change. Today, a UN report came out, said the last 70 years were the hottest on record. We have the highest CO2 in our atmosphere that we've ever had, and our oceans are warming. So when you go to your polls on May 19th for early polls or June 2nd, make sure you vote for the party that puts these priorities first. I hope I've convinced you that that's the new Democratic Party, but just get out and vote because it's your democratic right. Thank you.
Thank you. Rochelle Devereaux, Ontario Liberal Party.
Thank you. We have never in the history of time been at a place where we lived through such confusion, such chaos, and where the result has been all-time low in trust in elected officials and trust in government. The second most frequent thing I hear when I go to doors is that people are exacerbated, they're exhausted, and they are struggling, and they aren't sure what to do or the best option in this provincial election because they don't trust the systems that have been in place to protect them. At the Guelph Community Health Centre, I have led change that has increased trust in leadership by 120%. And that change happened with those people who are most affected, the people that I employed. I commit to leading in the same way, should I be given the honor of serving my community at Queen's Park, by building relationship and trust, including and especially across the teams and positions of our community members whose opinions may not actually align with my own. When I knock on doors and people say you don't want to talk to me, I actually indicate you're exactly who I want to talk about and talk to. And so I commit to being a transparent, trust-building leader who would love to earn the ability to represent you at Queen's Park.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes today's Q&A session. I'd like to thank the Guelph and District Association of Realtors and Michael Keegan and Associates for making this event possible. Thank you to the audience who joined us live this evening. We will be posting a recording of today's session on our YouTube page. You can expect that tomorrow. And I'd also like to thank the candidates for your courage, commitment, and desire to serve our community. A reminder to everyone, Election Day is June 2nd. Please vote. Your voice matters. Thank you all.
Seating program. We now join the regularly scheduled program already in progress.
I got you on my mind. You give me joy and make me smile.
Welcome back. So what do we do with all this great introspection? How do we bring it to life? Well, awareness is a great first step so that we can do more of these things. Appreciation is important so that we can grow and maximize what is already there. And gratitude is essential, recognizing and being thankful for what we already have. And then keep asking questions. Why do you connect with these things that you have listed? What is it exactly that is so important to you about them? Think about it from this mindset. When you are true to yourself and are authentic and using your greatest strengths, you are truly a gift that has so much to offer. We're going to ask 8 questions. They are taken from this wonderful book called 52 Lists for Happiness, written by Maria Seal. It's one of my favorite journaling books. If you want to reflect a little bit longer on the questions that we asked today, they can be downloaded from the Rogers website on the Happiness Show page. Ready? First question is this. What makes you happy right now? The challenge here is to try to let go of the things that society has told us should make us happy. If being married or having a big house or a big career feels more like an expectation and not something you truly desire, let go of it. Try your best to unhear what advertising and social media and well-intended friends and family may have been suggesting to you. Be very true to your heart. Next question. List the things that made you happy as a child. This is so telling. These are things that you loved before someone labeled it for you as worthy or unworthy. When you didn't care about appearances, when you didn't care about whether it was cool or not, and you didn't worry about whether you were good at it. You just love doing it. They're likely really simple things, but they probably haven't changed much, or you may have grown into a bigger version of it. This helps us get to the core of why things make us happy. Third question. List the things that you're really good at. Happiness is already within you. It tends to bubble up when you're doing something that you're really good at. Next question. List the things that get you out of your head. Think of those activities where you totally lose track of time, where you forget about eating or drinking. You're just immersed in your activity. You're totally absorbed. This is called being in flow, and in this state is when we are at our happiest. What are those activities for you? Fifth question. List the people that make you happy, and ask yourself, what is it about these people that makes you feel good? List the best choices that you have made in your life so far. This list is something that we should reflect on often. It helps us realize that we are doing things right, and it helps us trust our inner wisdom and be grateful for those decisions and outcomes that we have created. List the things from your past and present that feel like blockades in the way of happiness. This can be really hard. It takes courage because it requires absolute honesty and vulnerability, radical truth, and accepting reality. Now we bring this all together. We have a couple of lists of things that make us shine, things that are working for us, and we have a list of things that feel like blockades. They seem to be working against us. We also know that we can make good choices and have been doing many things right because we've done this in the past. So think about your life right now. Think about the environment that you want to create for yourself. Final question. What choices and changes do you have to make to create the life that you want to lead? I'll leave you to think about that one. Don't worry if you didn't catch all the questions on the check-in today. Just go to the Rogers website and everything's on the Happiness Show page for you to download. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I would like to thank Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, who has been my guest on the last 2 episodes. We are on a mission to help make everyone's life happier. If you want more information on what we talked about on the Happiness Show or want more resources or personalized help, please reach out. Your happiness should not be compromised. You can go directly to the website, thehappinessshow.ca, or through Rogers TV. We will see you next time. We still have lots in store.